Hey folks, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to our now weekly ID Invaded discussion series. Because oh yes, we are definitely going to continue covering this here on the channel. That is a given. Before we start the video though, I got two things that I want to talk about right off the top, and the first is a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Japan Code Supply. If you find yourself playing Japanese exclusive games, or say the Japanese version of games such as Dokkan Battle, Love Live, stuff like that, then you know that you're gonna need to get your hands on some Japanese gift cards in order to actually get that premium currency, and that is where Japan Code Supply comes in handy. The good folks over at Japan Code Supply have decided to reach out, and they offered me a discount code for all of you. So if you spend anything over $50 over on JapanCodeSupply.com and you use the promo code JoJo Talks Too Much, all one word, you can go ahead and take $3 off your purchase. A big thank you to the good folks over at Japan Code Supply for reaching out, and hopefully you guys use their service. They will forever be linked in the description. And of course, I wouldn't feel right starting today's video without thanking the good folks who shared last week's video over on Twitter. At Bubbalubber, at Foxton2X, at Nacho Cashardo, at Anime Trashbin, at Yin Yang Reader, and at Melva After Dark. Thanks so much for sharing last week's video over on Twitter, everybody, and if you too would like to have your name shouted out in next week's ID Invaded video, then be sure to share this video around on the internet, and then tag me at JoJo Talks Too Much over on Twitter, and I will be sure to shout your name out in next week's video. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and dig into episode 3 of ID Invaded Sniped. Yeah, with a title like that, you know there's gonna be some shenanigans going on in this week's episode. And like I did for yesterday's video on Izoken, I decided that I'm going to structure the series of videos a little bit differently. Instead of going through the episode piece by piece by piece, I am instead going to just talk about the things that most spoke to me during the episode. And this week, there are 3 things that I really want to talk about. I want to talk about why the show is titled the way that it is. I want to talk about Sakaido's past trauma, and I of course want to talk about the pyrotechnician case that this episode is focused around. Let's go ahead and start by talking about the title of the series, since I feel like I definitely contributed to the confusion surrounding the series. That's on me, and that's a mistake on my part, because I'm a big idiot and I didn't realize what the show was going for, and it actually helped, in my opinion, to kind of wreck the series a little bit. And it's funny how just one letter being uppercase instead of lowercase can really throw my balance off. And that's because the show is not ID invaded, as I may have said at the beginning of this video, I think, but it's actually ID invaded. This is to say that it's not ID invaded, as in identification invaded. It is ID invaded, as in the id, the ego, the superego from Freud. If you don't know what id, ego, and superego are, they are basically Sigmund Freud's idea of what the human psyche's model is. Oh yeah, that's right. We're gonna be talking about psychology in today's video, and it's coming from an uncultured, uneducated person on psychology, so you know I'm definitely gonna get all the facts right. And if you have any questions, you may of course consult my teacher, Wikipedia. So the id in ID Invaded actually means the uncoordinated and instinctual desires of a human being. So that would explain a lot when you think about it. When we first saw the characters invade the ID well, as I called it, which is wrong, it is the id well. So what we're seeing is not quite the person's mind. What it is their id. You are seeing their id. Their well is literally their id personified. That's why it's so chaotic and weird. It doesn't really function on rationale or reason because it's not meant to. This would be the uncoordinated and instinctual desires of the person with whom they're diving into. So their well is literally a deep dive into the dark parts of their mind that they don't want you to know about. It's why there's no real protection in there. The person is vulnerable as can be because it's the most raw version of said person. Their most instinctual motives and desires personified in their id well. And since I think it's fun and actually kind of pertinent information, let's go ahead and talk about the superego and the ego in Freud's human psyche model. So the superego would be the one taking up the critical and moralizing role. This is like the analytical part of your mind, essentially. At least that's my interpretation of what the superego is. Again, not very well educated in psychology. Didn't go to school for it, if you'd believe it. I went to school to be a cameraman, and look how well that turned out. So the superego, I am not super sure how it would factor into the show, but the ego that's where you have me intrigued. As you see, the ego would be the organized and realistic part of the mind, and it mediates between the superego and the id. Take a wild guess on who the ego would be. Yes, that's right. In my opinion, the ego is actually Sakaido. Sakaido serves as the sort of mediation between the id and the higher-ups, right? They're trying to piece together the pieces of the puzzle to make everything make sense and catch the bad guy. And we also do get a little bit of how they're able to dive into the well, but we'll get into that a little bit later on in the video. But yeah, this actually does help make the series make that touch bit more sense. I actually feel like I fully grasp what's going on now. Well, not fully. There's still a lot that I don't know, right? But it does actually start to make a little bit more sense. And honestly, it's starting to remind me more and more of Inception with each passing minute. But I do like the fact that knowing what the id and ego are actually helps you understand the series, and like I said, just changing that capital D to a lowercase d suddenly makes the show make a whole lot more sense, and heck, I learned something today. I didn't even really know what the hell the id and ego were. The amount of things that I have to research for these videos would make your head spin. I actually feel like I learn a whole lot about external stuff outside of anime just by having to do research to talk about the shows that I'm talking about. So that's just the fun part of making these videos. So thank you, ID Invaded. I actually feel a little bit more cultured now. And I also feel like I know a little bit of what the hell is going on. So that's also nice. And I wanted to pass that information on to you as well as apologize. It is id invaded, not ID invaded. The second thing I wanted to talk about in regards to this week's episode is Sakaido's trauma. And my goodness, this dude has Mount Everest levels of issues that he has to deal with. And I am gonna kind of cut this off at the past, since I saw somebody comment about this last week. When I'm talking about Sakaido, I'm just going to refer to him as Sakaido, like, the whole time. I know that Sakaido in the show is meant only to refer to the detective, but for us, the purposes of our videos, I'm just going to be referring to him as Sakaido the entire time. If that's confusing, I'm sorry. I just honestly find it less confusing than calling him two separate names. Sakaido is shaping up to be potentially one of the more interesting characters of the winter season, not just in id, but just in general. I actually find his character to be that sort of like broken down detective who went too far and is struggling back to join the light, and that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from Sakaido, which, sure, in a lot of cop dramas can be a little bit generic, you know, like the beaten down cop who's just seen too much and gone too far, but at the same time, the reason why it's a cliche is because we like to see it, and yeah, you love to see it. I like to see the broken detective trying to put the pieces back together, and that's Sakaido all over. When we open the episode, we're basically reunited with Sakaido right away, who is trying to piece together his own memories of the past, and he's actually forcing himself to remember things properly, as you see like a situation play out where it's this like pleasant little memory of like Sakaido and his wife. They're sort of laying in bed, they're being cute and dorky and all that shit, and it's adorable, right? It's this adorable little moment. And then you hear Sakaido say, but it didn't happen like this. Like this, it wasn't like this at all. We later cut to Sakaido playing video games with his kid, and they're having fun. They're playing some sort of like Tekken or Street Fighter ripoff game, and they're just having a good time. They're talking to each other. His kid says like, so you've gotten really good at this whole detective thing, right? Do you think I could become a detective one day? And they keep referring to him as Meitante, which just makes me think of Detective Conan, because that's how Detective Conan usually opens, like, Meitante, Conan, every time. So I keep confusing Sakaido now with Detective Conan, and that's a crossover that would blow my friggin' mind if that ever happened. Maybe I'll talk about Detective Conan movies. That'd be fun. The Detective Conan movies are dope. Anyway, yeah, Sakaido's kid refers to him as, like, the great detective, and asks if she too can become a great detective one day. And Sakaido is like, yeah, I'm like, sure, I mean, I guess. But then we see our Sakaido in his, like, real-life form looking at the memory and just saying, it most definitely did not happen like that. I barely had any time to hang out with my kid, let alone actually, like, play video games and have her want to be a detective like me. After he became a detective, as it turns out, he never really had time to spend with them. So he spent all this time working to protect them and protect the world that they lived in, and working to bring home money for these people who he really did love, but he didn't get to spend as much time with them as he wanted, and in the end, he couldn't even protect them. Since this happy little moment eventually cuts to this room just covered in gore, and I was literally like, that put me on my heels, because that's a lot of blood, and I mean like a lot. And I'm not going to show the kid's body just because it's brutal. I'm just going to show the scene of blood if I do show anything, because the blood-covered walls are like I said, it's a lot. And they go on to, and this is pretty graphic, so if you don't like this kind of stuff, then cover your ears for a couple minutes, although I don't know why you're watching It Invaded, because something tells me the rest of the show is going to be very intense. But basically what ends up happening is that we find out that Sakaido was killed by a serial killer known as the Challenger, who essentially forced Sakaido's kid, his daughter, to fight him while she was horribly beaten already. Like, he had, when they found her, he said that most of her bones were broken, her lung was punctured, her heart was almost crushed, and the final killing blow, I have to assume, was that the back of her head was broken and brain matter had spilled out, so she was screwed up. And even when he's looking at his own memory, he says, like, it wasn't, like, we see her in the morgue, and Sakaido of the past is looking at the body going, like, she's immaculate. And our Sakaido that's where we find out what happened to her, because he's like, it was not like this. Like she did not look like this when I saw her. And he explains, like, this isn't real. Like this is me sugarcoating the past. I have to confront my past. That's at least the vibe that I got, because he doesn't outright say that. But the vibe that I got from that scene is him reinforcing, like, no, I am not sugarcoating the past. This is what actually happened, and I have to accept that this happened, and I just have to try to keep struggling on. The fact that we see Sakaido where he is now kind of does insinuate that the Challenger is very much dead, likely killed by Sakaido. And we see later on in the episode that Sakaido really does have a hatred of serial killers. Like, he's not the kind of dude who's like, maybe they could be rehabilitated. Like, no. He will kill them if he finds them. And he purposely, like, talks someone down later on, like, talks them into it, which is, of course, really friggin' dark. He straight up convinces this dude to kill himself, which is hardcore and, like, really scary. But at the same time, I think it makes sense given what his character has been through and how he would feel about people like the pyrotechnician. And the other thing, too, that I find is interesting is he very well could have become this, like, shell where he's just, like, cold and abrasive and just a killing machine, and he would just, like, love to get his hands on all these people, and he just has no sympathy left after everything that's happened. But that's not quite true, since when we see Sakaido in the well of the pyrotechnician, he instinctually, without thinking about it, leaps forward and saves somebody. He can't help himself. He has to save people. Even though he is on some level aware that all he has to do is solve the mystery. He even tells, like, a girl who's like, I can't take it, and tries to jump off the platform they're on. He's like, all right, go ahead, at least to be quieter. So I'm like, damn, Sakaido, that's cold. But he can't help himself. He reaches out and saves her. And he even says, like, sorry, couldn't help it. Like, so I really do think that on some level, Sakaido is a good dude still. Like, deep down, even though he has killed somebody, he still feels the need to help people. It's just part of who he is. It's part of his id, if you will, his instinctual desire to help people. And it's part of the reason why I think Sakaido is just a really interesting dude, likely one of the more interesting and fascinating characters of the season. And the last thing I want to talk about in regards to this week's episode is, of course, the pyrotechnician case, which I gotta say, starts with a bang! That's right. When we open this week's episode with the pyrotechnician case, basically what we see is a building friggin' explode and then fireworks, which is like, okay, interesting. The whole fireworks aspect of the character this week, the villain of the week, basically shows this desire for attention and yet this need to be in the background. Like, this need to stay hidden. At least that's what I got. This interest in putting on a show for people, right? Like wanting people to pay attention to what they're doing. The pyrotechnician is a really dark dude, a very interesting character, but we don't really get to spend too much time with him since, like I said, Sakaido talks the dude to death. But the pyrotechnician essentially is revealed to kind of be like a fraud. Like he's saying like, oh, the reason why I did this was to show that like people are already dead. Look at how they take pictures with their smartphones and view the world through their phone. Nah, right? And at first I was rolling my eyes because I'm like, oh my god, what a stupid motivation. That's so generic. Like, that's so dumb, blah, blah, blah. But then Sakaido's like, I don't believe you. And the guy's like, what do you mean? He's like, no, that's not true, is it? The reason why you made that explosion is because you wanted to see that glimpse of hell again. And that is where you get my attention. That I was like, what are you talking about? And they explain that, or at least Sakaido deduces that the reason why he's actually setting off these bombs is not to prove a point, it's not to be an artiste, to show that the world is truly corrupt and everyone's already dead on the inside, and that life and death are meaningless and don't matter, and blah, blah, blah. It's none of that. What it actually is that our friend here, and I use friends in big air quotes, was a war vet. He was a soldier overseas and saw true carnage, saw hell on the battlefield. He was, from what I gather, a war photographer, since we see him with a camera, and he's taking pictures of this like grisly scene of like body parts like blown off by bombs and men riddled with shrapnel from gunfights and stuff like that. And instead of being horrified, I think this broke him, but not quite in the way that it would break most people. Instead, it made him interested in this level of brutality, this hell that he was seeing kind of enraptured him. And all he wanted was to see it again, right? He just wanted that again. And it really does play into how he's ultimately taken out, because Sakaido even says, like, you'll never see that hell again, which basically convinces him to, like, well, I'll just kill myself and go to hell then, which is like, holy shit, that's really dark. And I do think it's interesting how they tied in the fact that he was a war photographer into the id, since in the id, it's a sniper, right? So you think like, oh, okay, so he was a soldier, he must have been a sniper in his real life, but no, he was a photographer. But it still makes sense, because when you're taking pictures, what do you call it? You're shooting. When you're taking a quick picture, what do you call it? Oh, I sniped a picture. But that's pretty much all I can say about the technician. He's an interesting character. I kind of do wish that they didn't kill him off. I would have liked to have seen him play Hannibal to Sakaido, like across the cell. I do want Sakaido to have a character whose cell is directly across from him so that he can talk to him. Because we do find out that the killer from last week, the drill guy, he's still around. So maybe he'll be serving as our sort of Hannibal Lecter for the season. I'm not super sure, but I do think it's interesting. It's too interesting of a concept to have a killer be across from Sakaido, so I feel like they're eventually gonna either move the driller killer up to that room, or have somebody else be in that room to be across from Sakaido. I think it's too interesting of a concept to let go of. And the other big thing is that there is a lot of foreshadowing during the pyrotechnician arc just before it starts with Matsuoka and Hondomachi, since Hondomachi is still recovering from the insanity that was last week's episode, and Matsuoka is just kind of coming in to make sure that she's okay, check in on her, and they have a discussion that heavily foreshadows a hell of a lot. I'm just going to go through some of these here. Hondomachi mentions that she wants to dive into the well, to see her own well, to see her own id in person, to see what that's like, and Matsuoka basically says, like, that's a bad idea, because if you dive into your own well, there's a potential that the whole thing could fall apart and that you could be forever trapped in there. Once again, reminding me a lot of Inception. Spoilers for a movie that's like a decade old. I know that's ridiculous, but still, it reminded me a lot of Purgatory from Inception. The idea that even after the body dies, right? So if a detective, like say Sakaido, were to dive into his own well and get stuck there, even after the body dies, The mind would still be trapped in the machine, a ghost in the shell, if you will. Which to me means like the mere fact that this was brought up either means that Hondomachi's gonna do this or Sakaido is gonna do this. I don't know which of them will. I'm betting on Sakaido since Hondomachi was basically told like, you'll die. And she's like, oh, okay, I'm not stupid. So like maybe she won't. But then again, maybe the situation will call for it where she'll have to. I don't super know, but I can see Sakaido doing this for whatever reason. Also, the idea of Hondomachi becoming a detective makes a lot of sense. There's a decent amount of foreshadowing for that since she seems to be continually interested in Sakaido, in the great detective. She shows an interest in that aspect, and Matsuoka's very much against it, which to me, just by reading this scene, what I'm going to speculate and theorize is that Hondomachi will become a detective at some point, much to the chagrin of Matsuoka. I can also maybe see a situation where Matsuoka dies and Hondomachi decides to become a solo detective since she doesn't want a new partner, something like that. Although I don't think killing Matsuoka is necessarily in the cards, it just feels a little too mean. But speaking of Matsuoka, they also bring up the fact that Matsuoka and Sakaido were partners before Sakaido became the detective that jumps into the well. They actually were partners on the scene. And Matsuoka says that him and Sakaido never really got along, and he didn't really treat him as well as he probably should have, but now he just despises the dude because of what he's become. So there's definitely some hurt feelings there, and I do feel like we're gonna need to have a scene between Matsuoka and Sakaido in the future just to sort out some of those hurt feelings. I'm liking Matsuoka more and more as the show goes on, which worries me because, again, like I said, I have a feeling the show might kill him off. I feel like it'd be too mean, but the show has shown that it has no problem being mean to tell its story, so who knows? Either way, I really, really enjoyed this week's episode. The only real thing that I can say that I have an issue with is that there's points in the episode where it dragged a bit, where I felt like it could have been a little bit shorter or focused on other stuff, but overall, it was really, really freaking good. On that note, though, everybody, I am going to happily give this week's episode a very solid rank of A, which means that's 2 back-to-back A tiers for id. I'm very impressed. This is another show that could potentially be a series of the season. And that's gonna do it for today's video, everybody, so I hope you guys enjoyed, and before we go, as always, I have to give a big thank you to the good folks over on Patreon, especially those in the Earl Grey tier: Andrew W., Calvin A., Crowbar of Irony, Daniel G., Digger the Fox, Dominic G., Ionos, Urza, Ginkutaku, Godzilla Fan, No For Nothing, Maria Teresa, Marshall B., Mirth Mouser, Cell, Shadow Creative, Sipco Games, Somastan, Stephen G., Sakochi, Tristan G., and Verdon. A huge thank you to all of you in the T Squadron for your continued support, and if you too would like to join the T Squadron, then be sure to check out the first link in the description to check out our Patreon page, see all the cool rewards you can get over there, as well as access to our Patreon exclusive Discord for as little as $1 a month. And with that said, we're gonna wrap up today's video, everybody, so thank you all once again for watching, and if you are feeling stressed out today, then you go have yourself a warm cup of tea, and I will talk to you all again real soon.